I think battery life is one of the most important factors when it comes to a phone, so I'm just going to start there. Now, last year I saw a fairly noticeable improvement going from a 15 Pro to the 16 Pro. The 17 Pro takes this even further though. Now, there are a number of reasons why, but primarily Apple physically put a larger battery in the 17. There was about a 10% increase going from the 15 Pro to the 16 Pro, but going from the 16 Pro to the 17 Pro, it's now almost 20% larger. The Pro Max versions have some slight increases too, but not as much. Now, Apple claims the 17 Pro's battery life is significantly better than the 16 Pro and of course the 15 Pro, but that is using their testing methodology of mostly video playback, which in my opinion is a little bit flawed and not really indicative of real life usage. Now, I compare battery life using a combination of two things. The first being my own tests involving web browsing and social media use, gaming, video streaming, and some calls, of course. And then I compare that data against as many other sources I can find on the internet. So other YouTubers and review websites, for example, to make sure what I'm seeing on my own phone is accurate. What I saw is that on average, during typical everyday use, the 17 Pro had about 12 to 18% more battery life than the 16 Pro. And of course, comparing that to the 15 Pro, it really starts to add up. Now, when just purely watching or streaming videos or listening to music, yes, the 17 Pro is going to be significantly better. Now, anecdotally, for the first time ever, I'm often ending my day with anywhere from 40 to 60% battery capacity remaining. Granted, I'm not a hardcore user most of the time. Most of my day is spent on Wi-Fi, for example, but I only have to charge my 17 Pro roughly every 1.5 to sometimes 2 days, which is something I've never been able to do before unless using a Pro Max, which has the larger battery. Now, on days where I am out and about and, using the phone a lot, it's about 10 to 11 hours of hands-on usage each day, which is more than enough. And if you're spending more than that on your phone every day, you don't need a new iPhone, you need counseling. Now, one thing I never really see mentioned in reviews though is the battery degradation you'll get with older iPhones. So this 15 Pro was bought in, I think, October 2023. It was used for about 1 year. You can see the battery health, maximum capacity, and cycle count here. So if you're buying a second-hand iPhone, just be aware that the true battery life could be anywhere from, say, 1% to something like 10 or 20% worse than it was when brand new. Now, after battery life, I think the screen is the second most important thing. And I had to laugh when I used the compare feature on Apple's website. Their website guy must love his job. Just copy and pasting the same specs 3 years in a row. They all use the same Super Retina XDR tech with a dynamic island, with ProMotion 120Hz refresh rates and always on display. This is all the exact same on the Max variant as well, by the way, just slightly bigger. But the 16 and 17 Pro and of course Max specifically have several minor changes. The first being their screen is 0.2 inches bigger than the 15. Now, I didn't personally notice this at all, even holding them side by side in my hand. It's just too small of a size increase to make a noticeable difference. It does make the bezels look a little bit smaller though. Secondly, the ceramic shield glass on the 16 Pro was supposed to be 50% stronger than the previous generation, but after just a few months of use, mine was already scratched. Now, the 17 Pro supposedly has ceramic shield 2 technology with 3 times better scratch resistance, whatever that means. So stay tuned for the 2026 version of this video. And yeah, I'll let you know how true that is. Also, the 17 Pro has a newly developed anti-reflective coating and an increased 3000 nit maximum brightness level versus 2000 nits for the 15 and 16 Pro. I found during everyday use, these are relatively minor improvements, but when combined, there is a slight difference when outside in a bright environment. I found the 17 Pro screen just ever so slightly easier to see, and reflections were more subdued, but certainly nothing groundbreaking. One last little difference is a gift to the insomniacs among us. A 1 nit minimum brightness on the 16 and 17 Pro, so you can turn the screen brightness all the way down and not ruin your eyes in a really dark environment. Now, in terms of physical differences, the 17 Pro feels the best when just like straight up holding it in my hand. The edges feel slightly more rounded and softer, and despite it weighing only a few grams less than the 16 Pro, it somehow just feels a little bit lighter. Now, the camera bump, which Apple now calls the camera plateau, is obviously extended on the 17 Pro, but functionally, it doesn't really make any difference. Now, all of the buttons and port selections are identical to the 16 Pro, and the only real difference to the 15 Pro is the addition of the camera control button. Now, I'm sure you're already very familiar with the camera control button and its function. Either love it or hate it, so I'm not going to waste any time talking about it. The USB-C ports on all 3 iPhones support the same USB 3 speeds, roughly up to 1 GB per second, as long as I used a USB 3 compatible cable and not the cable that Apple provides in the box with the iPhone, which is only USB 2. Now, one thing I did find very interesting was Apple's move from titanium on the 15 and 16 Pro to aluminium on the 17 Pro. Yes, aluminium, not aluminum. I'm Australian, not American. That's just how we say it here. Now, remember how Apple made such a big deal about the titanium frame? So kind of makes you wonder, why did they change it? Well, as far as I can tell, titanium is heavier, more durable, and more expensive versus aluminium, which is lighter, cheaper, and perhaps most importantly, has better thermal conductivity for cooling. And I will talk more about that later. Now, one negative of aluminium is that it's less resistant to damage because it's a softer metal, right? A few people have commented that their iPhone 17 Pros are showing scratches and dents more easily, but I don't know about you, my phone goes into a case the day I buy it and never leaves it, so it doesn't really bother me. Now, the 17 Pro is actually just one single piece of aluminium, right? It's a unibody design, but there is a cutout on the back here to allow for wireless charging. And instead of the glass that Apple would usually put here, like they did on previous versions of the iPhone, they've actually put a ceramic shield for increased durability, or so they claim. But again, it's probably going to be in a case, so who cares? Quick note on charging here as well. The 17 Pro and of course the Pro Max can charge to 50% via cable in just 20 minutes versus 30 minutes for the 15 and 16 Pro, as long as a 40 watt or higher charger is being used. Note that this is going from an almost empty battery to 50%, from 50% to 100%. There's really not that much difference in charging speed because the maximum possible charging speed actually decreases as the battery's charge level increases. Now, they all have MagSafe wireless charging too, but the iPhone 15 Pro is only 15 watts versus 25 watts for 17 Pro. Now, to me, this was the biggest noticeable difference because I usually charge via MagSafe these days. Now, speaking of MagSafe, I actually ended up buying Apple's new MagSafe battery pack, but I realized that it doesn't actually fit on the iPhone 17 Pro. It only fits the iPhone Air. And it's also really expensive at $99 US. So what if there was something cheaper and better and also compatible with all MagSafe phones? Well, that is where Anker's new Nano power bank comes in. And big thanks to Anker for supporting my work on this channel and sponsoring this section of the video. Now, the Anker Nano power bank has a capacity of 5,000 milliamp hours, which is enough to fully charge the iPhone 17 Pro 1.2 times versus the iPhone Air MagSafe battery's 3,000 milliamp hours. The Nano also charges the iPhone faster at up to 15 watts wirelessly versus just 12 watts, and it costs half as much. Also, check out Anker's Nano charging station. It can output up to 130 watts of power, which is enough for the iPhone 17 Pro's max charging speed of 40 watts, and even can charge 2 MacBooks from 0 to 50% in just 30 minutes simultaneously. It can charge your iPhone, MacBook, and MagSafe battery all at once, and at just 0.7 inches thick, it slips easily into any bag and comes with a travel pouch, the perfect portable companion for travel, business trips, or outdoor work. So make sure you check out Anker's Nano power bank and Nano charging station using the link in the description below. Now, in terms of performance, here's where it gets really interesting for the iPhone 17 Pro. Now, each generation of iPhone Pro chip has, of course, multiple improvements upon the last. For example, the iPhone 17 Pro now has 12 gigabytes of RAM versus 8 gigabytes for the 15 and 16. And just looking at straight performance, you can see how these improvements impact each phone. There will be a noticeable difference between each generation. But in everyday use, I only really notice these differences in demanding situations, right? Like gaming, or the speed at which the generative AI feature in Apple Intelligence can generate an image, for example. The extra 4 gigabytes of RAM on the 17 Pro certainly helps with that too. For everyday use, like scrolling, opening apps, taking photos, social media, or web browsing, for example, I couldn't really tell a difference. And I think that's pretty important because those activities are what I do 95% of the time on my phone. However, the secret weapon of the 17 Pro is its new vapor chamber cooling system. Now, it's essentially an airtight chamber filled with a small amount of deionized water. And when the A19 Pro chip heats up, like when playing a game, for example, the thermal energy is transferred into the water, which turns it into vapor, which then is able to move around the vapor chamber and distribute the heat over a much larger surface area. Now, you can kind of see this difference in a thermal imaging shot comparing the 16 Pro and the 17 Pro after 15 minutes of playing a demanding game. The 16 Pro has a lot more heat concentrated in the immediate area around its chip versus the 17 Pro. This also made the 17 Pro a little more, comfortable to hold in my hand during those intensive tasks. The heat is just more spread out, and the chassis is just overall a few degrees cooler. Now, that's why the change from titanium to aluminium was so important, right? Aluminium allows the heat to move from the A19 chip and get dissipated throughout the chassis more efficiently. How does this improved cooling system impact everyday usage? Well, in my experience, typically after 5 to 10 minutes of a demanding task, like playing a game, for example, there is a noticeable performance drop because the chip has reached its thermal capacity, right? Usually this is in the form of reduced FPS while gaming, or maybe the screen dims when recording a really long video. Now, Apple claims up to 40% faster sustained performance on the A19 Pro versus the A18 Pro. In my experience, I saw somewhere between 15 to maybe 30% better performance, but it really depended on the task and how long I was doing that task for. It was noticeably better than the 16 Pro though. Side note, the 128GB SSD base model is now gone and replaced with 256GB. But remember, this year, the 17 Pro is an extra $100 more expensive than the 16 Pro. So I guess it kind of balances out a little bit. Moving on to the camera, there are a couple of differences between all three iPhones, but in this video, I really want to focus on how the new updates on the 17 Pro compared to the 16 Pro. If you want a more detailed 15 Pro versus 16 Pro video, you can check out my previous 2024 version of this video, and I will link that in the description. So starting with the front camera, we finally get an upgrade here. The 17 Pro has an 18 megapixel center stage front camera versus the 12 megapixel true depth camera on the 16 and 15 Pro. Did I notice a significant difference in quality? Not really. I think the main reason for the upgrade is the new square-shaped sensor, and that allows for features like tap to zoom and also rotating the image to switch between vertical and horizontal aspect ratios. Now, I actually really like this because instead of having to, hold my phone sideways, I can just hold it normally in my hand and take rectangular 16:9 aspect ratio photos or videos instead of the typical 9:16 smartphone aspect ratio. It's great for YouTube videos, selfies to fit more people in, or maybe recording a short clip for work that will be played back on a computer. Stabilization is slightly better on the 17 Pro's front camera too. I noticed this when recording while walking around, and there's a dual capture feature to record both front and rear cameras at once. Now, the only relevant thing I can see this being used for is maybe capturing your reaction to something like a wedding, or maybe seeing something for the first time. Now, I could also move the face cam window around during recording, but after the recording is finished, there's no editing it. And of course, it has center stage where the camera tracks you around the room. Now, moving around the back to the Pro camera system, I could really drag this section out and waste your time and talk about all the technical jargon and show you 50 side-by-side photos, for example. But the reality is, for all intents and purposes, they are very similar, apart from some cameras getting a 48 megapixel upgrade and, of course, different zoom levels. And when I say the ultra-wide or telephoto cameras are slightly better, I really mean that, by the way, because I only noticed a difference in low light or nighttime situations, and only when zooming right in and pixel peeping, which realistically isn't really something that most people do. For example, this photo taken at dusk with limited light using the 5x zoom on the 16 Pro and the 4x zoom on the 17 Pro. On my phone, when just looking at it on the screen, they both look identical, but if I zoom in, sharpness and clarity is improved on the 17 Pro's image. Another example is this sign. Again, zooming all the way in, the 17 Pro's image does look better. This is the exact same with the ultra-wide lens as well. There are improvements going from the 15 Pro to the 48 megapixel 16 Pro lens, but again, I just didn't find it to be a very big difference. Personally, I found the different zoom levels had the most impact in my day-to-day usage. A 3x zoom is just not enough in my opinion, especially when traveling. I've gotten some amazing shots using higher zoom levels, shots that are just impossible to get with the 1x or 2x zoom. The additional 8x zoom option on the 17 Pro gives me that additional zoom for super far away stuff. Granted, the quality of the 8x zoom images and videos aren't as sharp as the 4x zoom. The 48 megapixel sensor crops them to 12 megapixels, but I didn't really find that to be a problem for me. Actual video quality is almost identical between the three cameras too. I just couldn't find any noticeable differences. That being said, only the 17 Pro and the 16 Pro are able to shoot 120 FPS in 4K, including in ProRes log, up from 60 FPS on the 15 Pro. Note that I had to plug in an external storage device to record more than 30 FPS in ProRes, regardless of which phone I was using though. The 17 Pro, however, is the only one that can do ProRes RAW, has Genlock and OpenGate support. But these more advanced features, for me personally at least, are not relevant. Like, I had to Google what Genlock means when I first heard about it, and I think this is likely the case for most people watching. But again, I suppose the option of those pro features is still there if you ever want to use them, which is nice. So, in conclusion, for the camera comparison across all three phones, really depends on how much you utilize the camera system, right? Like if you're just the type of person to just point your phone at something and take a picture or a video, and you never really venture into the settings, and you're not printing photos to hang on a wall, for example, where sharpness is really important, I just didn't notice a major difference outside of these zoom levels. If microphone quality is important, the 16 Pro got a big upgrade with 4 studio quality microphones, and this upgrade is unchanged on the 17 Pro. I'm recording this voiceover using them right now with no editing. This is how it sounds straight out of the phone. It sounds pretty good, right? Almost as good as my really expensive microphone I usually use to record these videos. So which of these 3 iPhones should you buy? Well, for me personally, after using all of these phones a lot, especially the 15 Pro and 16 Pro, I just really like the 15 Pro. It was a huge improvement over the 14 Pro and actually holds up really well now, 2 years after it was released. Like, you're getting very similar features to the 17 Pro, very similar camera performance, battery life is still decent. Is it a wise purchase decision in 2025 or 2026? Maybe not, depends on how cheap you can get it. I think the real comparison is the 16 Pro and 17 Pro. Now, if you already have a 16 Pro, of course, don't be silly and upgrade to the 17 Pro. I don't think it's worth it, and it's a waste of money. Same thing if you're already on a 15 Pro. I don't think you need to go out there and buy a new phone. But if you're trying to decide between the two and which one to buy, there are really only a few areas where the 17 Pro comes out ahead. Firstly, battery, of course, it's an instant, 12 to 18% more. Performance for things like gaming is better too, especially if you tend to have longer sessions over roughly 10 minutes in length, where that improved cooling system starts to make a difference, and the upgraded front camera and 8x zoom capability. Those are the 4 major differences between the 16 Pro and 17 Pro, at least in my opinion, after using both of them for a decent amount of time. So depending on how cheap or discounted you can get the 16 Pro, maybe the 17 Pro isn't worth it. Or maybe it is, I don't know, it's your money. If you're still not quite sure, then YouTube thinks that this video will help, so make sure you give it a click.